Greetings, class. Today I want to talk to you about American History Part 1 and what I think is an important topic that we should discuss as historians and professors. I think we need to make a distinction between the American Revolution and the American War for Independence. A lot of people sort of assume that those are the same thing, and indeed the American War for Independence is part of the American Revolution. But remember, a revolution is about things changing, and the American War for Independence is important. That's how we get our independence from Great Britain. But the American Revolution is really what takes place in the bigger picture. It's about our changing attitudes about who can rule, where power comes from, what rights individuals have, and it's an important distinction to make. So I think an important competency, learning outcomes and goals, would be to understand and evaluate the ideals and processes of the American Revolution to include political, economic, social, and cultural factors. I want to mention three secondary sources that I think are important of addressing this issue. There's tons of information on this, but Bernard Bailyn, he wrote a book called The Ideological Origins of the American Revolution, and in that book he sort of looks at the British history of the Americans and sees how things like the precedents established by the Glorious Revolution and the writings of John Locke and things like that affect the ideas of the Americans who are basically creating our country in the late 18th century. Another book, Jack Rakove, Declaring Rights, A Brief History with Documents. This is an interesting book. Here he looks at some of the founding documents like the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, but he analyzes them, adds commentary, things like that, breaks them down, which is important of establishing how important this revolution is, not just for our nation, but really for the entire world. And then Gordon Wood, The Radicalism of the American Revolution. Gordon Wood basically argues against the idea that, some people were arguing that the American Revolution wasn't revolutionary, that it didn't change anything. It went from rich white guys being in charge to other rich white guys being in charge, and Wood argues against that, and he says, no, the idea that all men were created equal, even if that only applied to white men in the late 1700s, the idea that all men were created equal was revolutionary for its time, and that idea led to things like the 13th, 14th, 15th, and 19th Amendments. And so Gordon Wood argues that the ideas created in the American Revolution are important. As far as primary sources go, there's two that I want to mention. There's tons of information about this, but two that I think are important, two examples from the father of our country, George Washington, and they are somewhat similar, but show how important this revolution is. So first would be George Washington's resignation and address from June 1783. This is when he resigned his position as commander of the Continental Army. Okay, that's important because during this time period, George Washington's the most important man in America by far. He has the support of the people, the support of his officers. There was even an attempt by his officers to overthrow Congress and make George Washington a monarch, and he put that down. And the fact that he resigned his position as this military leader to basically go home and farm and live a quiet life for the rest of his life, that's significant. In world history, military leaders that either fought for independence or overthrew a government or something like that almost always become the next monarch, and George Washington didn't do that. Now, you could make an argument, well, yeah, but he became president, but you got to understand, in 1783, he didn't know that. There wasn't even a constitution yet that described what a president was. So the fact that he was willing to step down from that position of power is indeed revolutionary. The second source I want to mention is Washington's resignation of the presidency from September of 1796. Similar example here. Washington served 2 terms. He served 2 terms because he thought it was his duty. People elected him, and he felt that was his calling to serve as president. But after the second term, he said, okay, that's it. I don't want you guys to elect me again. I want to go home and lead the quiet life. That's important because, people didn't, historically, when a family was in power or a person was in power, They didn't leave power till they died or somebody forced them out. And here's George Washington, who's willingly wanting to step down and not pursue a third term. There was no constitutional requirement that he couldn't serve a third term. That didn't come till much later. But he stepped down and he said, it's time for the American people to pick a new executive. All right, and that shows where he was trusting the power to be with the people. And so these just two small examples that show you how revolutionary this American Revolution really was, from our declaring all men created equal to us letting people pick, the representation in government, and then, the idea that someone would step down from a position of power. Those things are all revolutionary. And I think as historians and professors, we need to make sure people understand that the American Revolution is more than just a war. Thank you.